On the second Sunday after my father's funeral, at exactly 8:15 in the morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and unlocked the front door to a house I knew I would never live in again. The strange part was this: I still owned the key, and technically, according to the probate records filed 2 days earlier, my sister believed she owned everything else. Before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had a family member try to bully you out of something that was legally yours. Hit the like button and subscribe. Because what happened over the next few weeks destroyed my entire family and exposed a secret my father had buried for 5 years. My name is Natalie Carter. I'm 34 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant in Sacramento, California. My job is simple in theory. I follow money that people try very hard to hide. I reconstruct financial crimes from numbers most people would never notice. And until my father died, I believed the worst fraud I would ever investigate belonged to strangers. I was wrong. Because the most complicated financial crime I ever uncovered was sitting at my own family dinner table. My sister, Courtney Carter Holloway, was 3 years older than me. Growing up, she was what therapists politely call the golden child. My mother adored her. Teachers praised her. Neighbors admired her. Courtney was beautiful, confident, and knew exactly how to perform the role everyone expected. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the one who read contracts for fun, the one who noticed inconsistencies, the one who asked questions that made people uncomfortable. That difference defined our entire relationship. Courtney got applause, I got suspicion. And then she married DeAndre Holloway. If you've ever met someone who walks into a room and behaves like they already own it, that's DeAndre. 6'2", perfect suits, perfect smile, and a voice trained to sound confident even when he was lying. He worked in finance. Specifically, he ran what he proudly called a boutique investment firm. In simpler terms, he raised money from wealthy clients and invested it in commercial real estate deals. At least that was the story. The truth was something very different, but I didn't know that yet. At the time, I only knew one thing. My father adored Courtney's husband. My mother worshipped him. And I was the only person who felt uneasy every time he opened his mouth. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was professional paranoia. Or maybe it was the way he always spoke about money like it belonged to him. 5 years ago, when Courtney and DeAndre got married in Tuscany, the wedding cost roughly $600,000. My father paid for most of it. At the time, everyone called it a generous gift, but the numbers didn't make sense. My father had been comfortable, not rich, certainly not the kind of man who casually funded $500,000 weddings in Italy. I asked him about it once. He just smiled and said something that stuck with me. Sometimes peace costs more than money. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Now, I do. 2 weeks before he died, I visited him in the hospital. He was weak, tired, but unusually focused. He asked me questions about forensic accounting, about shell companies, about offshore accounts, about how people hide assets during investigations. At first, I thought he was just curious about my work, but then he did something strange. He gave me a small leather pouch. Inside it was a brass key and a folded card with GPS coordinates. "Natalie," he said quietly, "one day you may need this. Don't tell your mother, don't tell Courtney, and never tell DeAndre." I asked him what it was. He only shook his head. Insurance. 3 weeks later, he died. The funeral was quiet. Courtney cried beautifully. My mother performed grief like she was on stage. DeAndre stood beside them in a perfect black suit, greeting guests like a CEO hosting a shareholder meeting. I said very little, but I watched everything. Because something about the entire situation felt wrong. And when something feels wrong, numbers usually explain why. 2 days after the funeral, I ran the first search. It took less than 5 minutes. Property records, corporate filings, mortgage histories. Public information most people never bother checking. That's when I discovered the house. Not this one, another one, hidden under a corporate trust, located near Lake Tahoe, purchased exactly 5 years ago. The same month Courtney's wedding happened. the same month my father liquidated his retirement portfolio.
And the trust beneficiary?
Me. That discovery was only the beginning, because 2 days later, my sister showed up at my front door with a real estate agent, an eviction notice, and the assumption that I was about to lose everything. What she didn't know was this. By the time she knocked on my door that morning, I had already moved out. And I had already started an investigation that would destroy her husband's entire empire. But the moment that investigation truly began was when DeAndre stepped onto my porch and said 5 words that made my stomach turn. The house belongs to the estate. Because the second he said it, I knew he had no idea what my father had really done. And that meant something very big was hiding in those numbers. And if you think this story is about inheritance money, you're wrong. The real story begins tomorrow afternoon, at the reading of my father's will. Because what my sister expected to inherit and what actually existed were 2 completely different things. The will reading was scheduled for exactly 1 p.m. the following afternoon. Not 12:55, not 1:10. My father had always been obsessive about punctuality, and apparently that habit extended all the way into death. The law office handling his estate was Harrison and Feldman, one of the oldest probate firms in Sacramento. Their building sat in a quiet block downtown, the kind of place with marble floors, heavy wooden doors, and receptionists who spoke in calm, careful voices. I arrived 15 minutes early. That wasn't anxiety. That was strategy. People reveal the most when they think no one important is watching. I sat in the waiting area with a notebook in my lap, pretending to scroll through emails while I studied the hallway. At 12:47 p.m., my sister arrived. Courtney Holloway walked in wearing a black designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her sunglasses were oversized, her hair perfectly styled, and her posture radiated the kind of confidence you see on people who already believe they've won. Behind her walked DeAndre. He looked even more polished than usual. Charcoal suit, silver tie, expensive watch. If you didn't know better, you'd assume he was walking into a corporate acquisition meeting, which, in a way, he thought he was. My mother arrived last. Barbara Carter always had a dramatic sense of timing. She walked in at 12:58 p.m., clutching her purse and dabbing her eyes with a tissue that had absolutely no moisture on it. When she spotted me, sitting quietly in the corner, her expression hardened immediately. "You're early," she said. I nodded once. Traffic was light. Courtney gave me a tight smile. "You don't have to stay long, Natalie." Her tone was sweet. Her words weren't. "Once the legal paperwork is finished, DeAndre and I will handle the estate logistics. It's really complicated financial work." DeAndre stepped forward and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry about the technical side, Natalie," he said smoothly. "Probate, asset liquidation, portfolio restructuring. It's a lot to understand if you're not in finance." I almost laughed, not out loud, just internally, because I spent my entire career dissecting financial fraud. But I didn't correct him. Sometimes it's better when arrogant people underestimate you. "Tell me something honestly," I said calmly. "Did you already hire a real estate agent for the house?" Courtney blinked. For a split second, her expression flickered. Then she smiled again. "Of course. That house is worth about $1.2 million in this market. We can't leave assets sitting idle." DeAndre nodded. "Exactly. Liquidity matters, especially right now." That sentence caught my attention. Right now. Those 2 words sat in my mind like a puzzle piece that hadn't found its place yet. The receptionist stood. "Mr. Harrison will see you now." We followed her down a quiet hallway into a conference room with a large mahogany table. I took the chair closest to the window. Courtney sat at the head, my mother beside her, DeAndre directly across from me. A few seconds later, the attorney entered. Richard Harrison was in his late 60s, tall, gray-haired, and calm in the way that only very experienced lawyers manage. He carried a thick leather binder. "Before we begin," he said, "I want to express my condolences for your loss. Your father was a very precise man. He prepared his estate carefully." DeAndre leaned back confidently. "Good to hear." Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and opened the binder. I will begin reading the formal document.
The first 10 minutes were standard legal language: revocation of prior wills, executor appointment,
Funeral expense allocations. Courtney listened impatiently, tapping her manicured nails against the table. Finally, Harrison turned a page. To my eldest daughter, Courtney Carter Holloway, I leave the role of executor of my estate. Courtney smiled. My mother squeezed her arm proudly. DeAndre gave a small, satisfied nod. To Courtney, Harrison continued, I also leave my personal checking account, my savings account, and the entirety of my brokerage portfolio. Courtney sat up straighter. She looked at DeAndre. I watched the two of them silently calculate numbers. Then Harrison pulled out a printed sheet. These documents reflect the current balances as of the date of death. He slid the paper across the table. Courtney grabbed it immediately. Her smile lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it disappeared. Her eyes widened. She looked at the paper again, then again. Mr. Harrison, she said slowly, there's a mistake. Harrison didn't react. There is no mistake. Courtney handed the page to DeAndre. He scanned it. His expression changed instantly. Checking account, $412. Savings account, $17.40. Brokerage account, 0. The silence in the room became heavy. Where is the rest? Courtney demanded. My father had retirement accounts, investments, real estate. Harrison closed the binder calmly. Those assets were liquidated 5 years ago. Courtney stared at him. That's impossible. DeAndre leaned forward. Who authorized the liquidation? Your father did. For a moment, no one spoke. Then DeAndre turned toward me. You knew about this. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I folded my hands calmly on the table. No, but I had a theory. You see, when someone liquidates their entire portfolio, 2 things usually happen. Either they're desperate or they're hiding something. And I had already started looking. Courtney slammed the paper onto the table. This doesn't make any sense. Where did the money go? Harrison glanced down at another page in the binder. Your father made several large financial transfers roughly 5 years ago. DeAndre's jaw tightened. Large transfers? Courtney leaned forward. How large? Harrison paused. $2,500,000. My mother gasped. Courtney turned slowly toward her husband. DeAndre looked perfectly calm. Strategic investments, he said smoothly. Your father trusted my firm. I almost smiled, because that was the moment the first layer of the lie appeared. Strategic investments, a phrase people in finance use when they don't want to explain something. Harrison continued reading. To my daughter, Natalie Carter, I leave my personal apology. Courtney laughed out loud. My mother shook her head. Even in death, she said, your father knew who deserved his support. I didn't respond, because Harrison hadn't finished. He flipped one more page. However, the word changed the room. To Natalie Carter, Harrison continued, I also leave full ownership and trusteeship of an independent financial trust established 5 years ago. Courtney froze. DeAndre stopped breathing for a second. The trust includes a property located near Lake Tahoe and an investment portfolio valued at approximately $2 million. The silence was absolute. Courtney's voice came out in a whisper. What? Harrison slid another document across the table. The beneficiary is Natalie Carter. The sole trustee is Natalie Carter. The trust is irrevocable. Courtney looked like someone had slapped her. DeAndre grabbed the document. He scanned it quickly, then again, then a third time. His confident posture cracked for the first time. Irrevocable trusts are nearly impossible to challenge legally, which meant one thing. The money was never part of the estate, and Courtney had no claim to it. That's when my sister stood up. Her chair scraped loudly across the floor. You manipulated him, she snapped. You convinced Dad to hide money from us. DeAndre's eyes were still glued to the paperwork. $2 million, he muttered. Courtney pointed at me. You planned this. I shook my head slowly. Actually, Courtney, I didn't plan anything. Dad did. DeAndre finally looked up, and when he did, the expression on his face told me something was very wrong. Not anger, not embarrassment. Fear. The kind of fear people get when they suddenly realize a secret they thought was buried is about to surface. And then he asked a question that confirmed my worst suspicion. Natalie, where exactly is that Lake Tahoe property? Because the moment he asked that, I knew he wasn't interested in inheritance. He was looking for something he believed was hidden there. And if my instincts were correct, the real war in this family was just beginning. The room stayed silent for several seconds after DeAndre asked about the Tahoe property. It wasn't curiosity, it was calculation. The difference is subtle, but when you spend your career studying financial criminals, you learn to recognize the moment someone's brain starts racing through risk scenarios. DeAndre wasn't thinking about family. He was thinking about access. Where exactly is that Lake Tahoe property? He repeated. His voice sounded calm, too calm, which immediately told me something important. This question mattered to him, a lot. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Why? Courtney snapped before he could answer. Because it belongs to the family. Her voice echoed in the quiet conference room. Dad wouldn't have hidden property from us unless someone manipulated him. She glared directly at me. You did this. You always wanted more than your share. My mother nodded aggressively. Exactly. Natalie has always been jealous of Courtney. This is probably some legal trick she convinced your father to sign while he was sick. It was fascinating to watch. Not the accusations. Those were predictable. What fascinated me was DeAndre's silence. He wasn't defending Courtney. He wasn't arguing. He was staring at the trust documents like they were a bomb he didn't know how to defuse. Finally, he looked up at the attorney. Mr. Harrison, he said, as executor, my wife has the right to review any property connected to the estate. Harrison shook his head immediately. No, that is incorrect. This property is not part of the estate. It is owned by a separate legal entity, the trust, which means the executor has zero authority over it. Courtney slammed her palm on the table. This is ridiculous. Dad was manipulated. We can challenge the trust. People challenge wills all the time. Harrison folded his hands calmly. You can attempt to challenge it, but I should warn you. Your father included what we call a poison clause. Courtney blinked. A what? If anyone contests the trust in court and loses, Harrison explained, they become financially responsible for all legal fees. Courtney scoffed. So? Harrison looked directly at DeAndre. Trust litigation typically costs between $300,000 and $600,000. The room became quiet again, because for the first time, the math mattered. Courtney slowly sat down. DeAndre's jaw tightened. He understood immediately. Because a man who actually runs an investment firm knows exactly what litigation costs. Which raised the question I couldn't stop thinking about. Why did he look worried about money? Successful fund managers don't worry about legal fees. Successful fund managers have liquidity. But something about DeAndre felt different today. Something tense, like he was balancing on a financial edge. I decided to test something. You're right, I said casually. Everyone looked at me. The Tahoe property probably isn't worth that much anyway. Courtney frowned. What do you mean? Cabins in that area average around $1 million, but off-grid properties tend to sell for less. Maybe $800,000? Courtney's eyes lit up again. See? She said quickly. Dad must have thought he was doing you a favor, but it's still family property. We should sell it and split the money. I shrugged. Maybe. DeAndre leaned forward suddenly. When was the last time you visited the property? The question was too fast, too sharp, which made me answer honestly. Never. I've never been there. That wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. And DeAndre's reaction confirmed something important. His shoulders relaxed slightly, almost like he'd just heard good news. Interesting. Why would it matter whether I had been there? Harrison closed the binder. That concludes the will reading. You will each receive copies of the relevant documents. Courtney stood immediately. We'll be challenging the trust. Harrison simply nodded. That is your legal right. Just remember the clause. Courtney grabbed her purse angrily. Come on, DeAndre. But he didn't move right away. He was still staring at me. Natalie, he said quietly, your father was a complicated man. Sometimes older people make decisions based on emotion instead of logic. I held his gaze. Sometimes. He smiled politely. Maybe we should talk privately later. About what? About doing what's fair for the family. I almost laughed. Fair. That word again. The same word people use right before they try to take something. I stood up. I think Dad already decided what was fair. And with that, I walked out. But the moment I stepped into the hallway, something unexpected happened. Harrison followed me. Miss Carter, he said quietly, may I speak with you for a moment? We stepped into a smaller office. He closed the door behind us. Your father asked me to give you something after the reading, he said. He opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. It had my name written on the front. His handwriting. When was this written? I asked. 5 years ago, the same year the trust was created. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, one sentence. Natalie, if DeAndre asks about the Tahoe property before you mention it, you were right about him. Trust your instincts. Love, Dad. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because my father had predicted this exact conversation 5 years ago, which meant something else. He already knew DeAndre would go looking for the cabin. Harrison watched my expression carefully. Your father was very concerned about that man, he said. Concerned how? Concerned enough to tell me that if DeAndre ever showed unusual interest in the Tahoe property, you should go there immediately. My stomach tightened. Why? Harrison hesitated. Because according to your father, there are documents hidden in that cabin. Documents he believed could destroy DeAndre's career. The room felt suddenly smaller. Destroy his career? Harrison nodded. Your father suspected DeAndre was involved in serious financial misconduct, but he never had enough proof to report it. So he collected evidence instead. I stared at him. You're saying my father built a financial trap? Harrison didn't answer directly. He simply said something that sent a chill down my spine. Your father believed DeAndre stole $2 million from him, and the proof is somewhere inside that cabin. Outside the office window, I saw Courtney and DeAndre leaving the building. DeAndre was already on his phone, walking fast, moving with purpose. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. If DeAndre suspected the evidence existed, he wouldn't wait. He would go to Tahoe, right now. Which meant, if I wanted the truth, I had to get there first. Because once DeAndre found those documents, he wouldn't destroy them. He would destroy me. And I had the uncomfortable feeling he was already on his way. At 4:30 that same afternoon, I was driving east on Interstate 80 with a full tank of gas, a duffel bag in the back seat, and a growing sense that my father had left behind something far more dangerous than an inheritance. Lake Tahoe was roughly 120 miles away. Under normal circumstances, that drive takes about 2.5 hours. But these were not normal circumstances, because if my instincts were correct, DeAndre Holloway was heading there too, and he was the kind of man who didn't lose quietly. Before I left Sacramento, I stopped by my apartment and packed quickly. Laptop, portable scanner, flash drives, cash, the leather pouch my father gave me. Inside it, the brass key and the folded card with GPS coordinates. The coordinates pointed to a remote section of the Western Shore, not a tourist area, not near the casinos, farther north. The kind of place where cabins sit alone among tall pines, and the nearest neighbor might be half a mile away. Off-grid, which meant two things: privacy and no witnesses. I kept checking my rearview mirror as I drove, not because I thought DeAndre was following me, but because I knew what kind of person he was. People like him don't accept losing. They escalate. As the highway climbed into the Sierra Nevada mountains, the air outside grew colder. Snow still lingered in the shaded areas between trees. The road curved sharply along cliffs in dense forest. Beautiful and isolated. About 90 minutes into the drive, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered using the car's Bluetooth. Hello? Natalie. DeAndre's voice, smooth, controlled. How did you get this number? I asked. Courtney still had you listed in the family contacts. Of course she did. You're heading to Tahoe, aren't you? He said. I didn't answer. He chuckled softly. Your father really underestimated me. That sentence told me everything. You know about the cabin, I said. I know more than that. My grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. What does that mean? DeAndre's voice lowered. 5 years ago, your father invested money into my firm. $2.5 million. That's not an investment most people forget about. He was helping Courtney's husband, helping the family. That's what everyone believed. But it wasn't the whole story. Your father started asking questions later, DeAndre continued. Questions about market positions, about offshore transfers. Questions he didn't understand. Questions you probably suggested he ask. Interesting accusation. I never talked to Dad about your business. That may be true, but someone did. And after that, he became suspicious. So you hid the money, I said. DeAndre laughed. No, Natalie. Your father panicked. He pulled the remaining assets out and locked them away in that trust. The Tahoe property. $2 million he refused to give back. The word back hung in the air. You're saying he owed you the money? I'm saying the money belonged to my firm, and I intend to recover it. That sentence confirmed something important. DeAndre believed the $2 million in the trust belonged to him, which meant he had no idea what was actually hidden in that cabin. Because if he knew about the documents, he wouldn't be talking about money. He'd be talking about survival. Let me ask you something, I said calmly. If the money belonged to your firm, why didn't you sue Dad while he was alive? There was a brief pause. Then DeAndre answered. Family disputes are complicated. Translation. He couldn't explain the money without exposing something illegal. You're making a mistake going up there, Natalie. Why? Because once I get there, things are going to get very complicated. That sounded less like a warning and more like a threat. I looked at the GPS. 45 minutes left. You should turn around, he said. I smiled slightly. You sound nervous. The line went quiet. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. I'm already 20 minutes away. The call ended. I stared at the phone, which meant one thing. He left before the will reading even finished. He already suspected the cabin mattered. And now we were both racing toward it. The road grew narrower as the GPS directed me off the main highway. Soon I was driving along a dirt road, surrounded by dense forest. No houses, no traffic, just trees and silence. Finally, the trees opened, and I saw it. The cabin. Dark wood, large stone chimney, wide windows facing the lake, and an iron gate blocking the driveway. My father had built a fortress. I parked near the gate and stepped out of the car. Cold mountain air hit my face. For a moment, everything was quiet, peaceful. Then I noticed something. The padlock on the gate was broken, cut clean through. Bolt cutters, which meant I wasn't first. I ran back to the car and grabbed the leather pouch. The brass key was useless now. Someone had already forced entry. I drove slowly up the long gravel driveway. The cabin door stood slightly open. My heart began pounding. DeAndre. He was already inside. And if the documents my father mentioned were really here, they were probably in danger. I stepped onto the porch carefully. The wooden boards creaked under my weight. The door swung open with a soft push. Natalie. His voice came from inside the living room. I stepped through the doorway. DeAndre stood near the fireplace.
His suit jacket was off, his sleeves rolled up, and in his hands were two thick binders. Financial ledgers. Exactly the kind forensic accountants use to document fraud. He smiled slowly. "You're too late." My eyes moved to the floor. Next to him sat a metal safe, open, empty. The rest of the documents were stacked beside it. Hard drives, folders, paper records, years of financial data. My father hadn't just suspected DeAndre, he had documented everything. And now DeAndre was holding the evidence. "You shouldn't have come alone, Natalie." His voice was calm again, but his eyes looked different, cold, calculating. Because the moment I walked into that cabin, I realized something terrifying. There were no cameras, no neighbors, no witnesses. Just me, and the man whose entire financial empire was sitting inside those binders. And people like DeAndre don't let evidence walk away. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The only sound inside the cabin was the faint wind pushing against the tall windows facing the lake. DeAndre stood near the stone fireplace holding the binders. I stood just inside the doorway, 30 feet apart. Between us sat the open safe and the scattered evidence my father had spent years collecting. If you're watching this and thinking I should have panicked right then, I understand. Most people would. But forensic accounting teaches you something important. When criminals feel cornered, they talk. And the more they talk, the more mistakes they make. So instead of reacting, I leaned casually against the doorframe. "You broke the gate lock," I said. "Property damage is a felony in California." DeAndre chuckled, still playing accountant even now. He tossed one binder onto the table and opened another. Pages of numbers flipped past his fingers. Wire transfers, corporate filings, transaction logs. My father hadn't just tracked suspicious activity. He had tracked everything. Every dollar, every company, every offshore transfer. "You know what I like about your father?" DeAndre said. "He was thorough. Very thorough." He lifted one page and held it up. "Look at this. 2,500,000 transferred to Holloway Strategic Holdings. 5 years ago. Perfectly legal. Signed personally by William Carter." I didn't respond, because he was only showing half the story. The money transfer itself wasn't illegal. What happened after it moved was the real problem. "You see the problem here, Natalie?" he continued. "Your father suddenly believed I was doing something illegal with his investment, which was absurd. So he decided to collect evidence." He tapped the binder. "Numbers, statements, copies of emails. A whole little conspiracy theory." "You're nervous," I said. His eyes narrowed. "No, I'm not." "Then why are you talking so much?" Silence filled the room again. That hit a nerve. "You think this changes anything?" he said finally. "You think these documents destroy me?" "They do, if they're real." I stepped forward slowly. My eyes moved across the papers on the table. Some of them were clearly bank statements. Others were internal transaction reports. And then I saw something that made my heart race. A list of corporate entities, shell companies, registered in Delaware, Nevada, and the Cayman Islands. Exactly the pattern used in large-scale money laundering. "Dad figured it out, didn't he?" I said. DeAndre smiled again. "You give him too much credit. But yes." Eventually, he started asking annoying questions. So he pulled the rest of his money out, $2 million, locked it away. Very dramatic. The trust, the Tahoe property, the secret safe, all to protect you. He flipped another page. But he forgot something. "What's that?" "I'm faster." And he lifted one of the hard drives from the table. These contain the only digital copies of his little investigation. If they disappear, this entire story disappears with them. I looked directly at him. "You really believe that?" He frowned slightly. "Because criminals always make the same mistake. They assume evidence exists in only one place. My father didn't raise an idiot. He built a safe system.
And safe systems always include redundancy. "What are you talking about?" DeAndre asked. I nodded toward the binders. "You really think Dad would leave the only copy of this evidence sitting in a cabin safe?" For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. I kept talking. Forensic accountants never keep original data without backups. He knew that. Which means the moment he finished documenting your little financial empire, he sent copies somewhere else. DeAndre stared at the documents again, then at me. "Where?" I shrugged. "Good question. Maybe with his attorney. Maybe with his bank. Maybe with the SEC. "You're lying." "Am I?" His confidence had cracked. Just a little, but enough. Because uncertainty forces people to reveal things. And DeAndre suddenly began flipping through the pages faster, searching, scanning, looking for something. Or maybe checking if something was missing. That's when I noticed something strange. One of the binders had several empty plastic sleeves, like pages had been removed. Interesting. "You already took something, didn't you?" I said quietly. His head snapped up. "No," but his reaction said otherwise. "What did you take?" he demanded. I smiled slightly. "So something is missing." He slammed the binder shut. "What did you take, Natalie?" I folded my arms. "What makes you think I took anything?" "Because those sleeves are empty, and your father labeled everything." He picked up the binder again. The label on the inside cover read, "Primary Transaction Records." Under it was another label, "Client List." DeAndre's breathing slowed. The client list wasn't there, which meant the most dangerous evidence had already disappeared. My father was smarter than I thought. "Where is it?" DeAndre asked quietly. I didn't answer, because suddenly I understood the real situation. The binders were evidence, but not the most important evidence. The client list was, and someone had already removed it, which meant one of two things. Either my father hid it somewhere else, or someone had already come here before DeAndre. "You're looking for a list," I said. DeAndre's eyes widened. "A list of people who invested through your shell companies, which means your operation isn't just fraud, it's money laundering." He stepped toward me suddenly. "Where is it?" I shook my head. "I don't have it." His expression darkened. "Then where is it?" Before I could answer, a loud sound echoed outside. Car tires on gravel. Both of us froze. DeAndre moved to the window, his face drained of color. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he whispered something under his breath. "No, no, no." I walked toward the window and saw exactly why he looked terrified. 3 black SUVs were pulling into the driveway, government plates, and men stepping out wearing dark jackets, with large yellow letters across the back, FBI. DeAndre slowly turned toward me. "You called them." I shook my head. Not yet, but someone clearly did. Which meant the evidence had already reached the authorities. And if the FBI was here, they weren't coming for me. They were coming for him. But as the agents started walking toward the cabin, DeAndre did something I didn't expect. He grabbed the hard drives, all of them, and ran for the back door. Because suddenly the man who had acted so confident was trying to escape with the only evidence that could put him in prison for the rest of his life. And the worst part? The back door led straight into the forest. And if he disappeared into those mountains, we might never see him again. The moment DeAndre grabbed the hard drives and bolted for the back door, I realized something important. This wasn't panic. It was instinct. Men like DeAndre don't run unless they believe they still have a chance to win. The back door slammed open, and cold mountain air rushed through the cabin. I heard gravel scatter as he sprinted down the small slope behind the house. Then silence. For half a second, I stood there deciding what to do. The FBI vehicles were still pulling into the front driveway. Agents were stepping out, but they hadn't seen him yet. If DeAndre made it into the forest with those drives, the investigation could take months, maybe years. And there was another problem. He wasn't just carrying evidence. He was carrying leverage, because the digital data on those drives wasn't just proof of his crimes. It was a map of every person involved, which meant every investor, every partner, every offshore account. And men like DeAndre don't operate alone. If he escaped, people much more dangerous than him would start asking questions, which meant one thing: he could come back for me later. So I made a decision. I ran after him. The back door opened onto a narrow trail leading down toward the lake. Tall pine trees surrounded the clearing behind the cabin. The ground was uneven, covered in rocks and patches of old snow. DeAndre was already 20 yards ahead. His dress shoes slipped slightly on the wet dirt as he ran. "You're making this worse!" I shouted. He didn't slow down. Instead, he looked back over his shoulder. "You should have stayed out of this." The hard drives were clutched tightly in his hand. 3 of them, maybe 4, enough to cripple the case if they disappeared. I kept moving. The cold air burned in my lungs as I followed him down the slope. Behind us, I heard shouting. Federal agents had reached the cabin. They discovered the open back door. Footsteps echoed through the trees. But DeAndre was still moving fast. He knew the terrain better than I expected, which meant something troubling. He'd probably been here before. The trail curved sharply along the edge of the hill. Below us, the lake stretched out like a sheet of glass. No boats, no people, no help. Suddenly, DeAndre stopped, not because he wanted to, because the trail ended. A steep drop led down to the rocky shoreline about 15 feet below. He turned toward me, breathing heavily. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he laughed. "You really ran after me. You always did have terrible instincts." I slowed to a stop 10 feet away. "It's over, DeAndre. The FBI is 30 seconds behind us." He shook his head. "No, it's not." He held up one of the drives. "This is everything. Every investor, every account, every offshore transaction. If this disappears, the government has nothing." That's not true, but criminals often need to believe evidence is fragile. So I let him keep believing. "You really think you can destroy all of that before they catch you?" I asked. He smiled. "Not destroy it, hide it." He looked toward the lake, then back at me. "Water destroys electronics pretty effectively." The realization hit me instantly. He planned to throw the drives into the lake. At this depth, recovery would be nearly impossible without specialized equipment. And by the time divers found them, the data could be gone. "You'd still go to prison," I said. "Maybe, but not for 15 years, and not for everything." Then he stepped closer to the edge. "You know what the real tragedy is?" he continued. "Your father almost got away with this, almost protected you. But he forgot something about people like me." "What's that?" "We always land on our feet." Then he did something strange. He tossed one of the drives toward me. It landed in the dirt near my feet. "Why would you do that?" I asked. He shrugged. "Call it insurance. Now you have one. I have the others. Maybe we both walk away with something." Classic negotiation tactic. Split the risk, reduce the loss. But he misunderstood something about me. I wasn't negotiating. I was buying time. Because at that exact moment, the agents burst through the trees behind us. "Federal agents!" one shouted. "Don't move!" DeAndre froze. For half a second, he seemed to consider running again. But the slope behind him was steep, and 3 agents had already drawn their weapons. "Put the drives down!" another agent yelled. DeAndre slowly raised his hands. The remaining drives were still in his grip. "You don't understand," he said calmly. "Those drives contain private financial information belonging to hundreds of investors. You're threatening a massive confidentiality violation." One of the agents stepped closer. "That's funny, because according to the warrant we're holding, those investors are victims. And you're under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering." DeAndre glanced at me. "This isn't over." "It never is," I replied. He looked toward the lake one last time, then slowly dropped the drives. Agents rushed forward. Within seconds, they had him face down on the ground. Handcuffs clicked shut. His expensive suit was covered in dirt. The perfect investment banker image, gone. One of the agents picked up the drives carefully. Another retrieved the one at my feet. "You Natalie Carter?" the lead agent asked. I nodded. "Special Agent Ruiz. Your report started this investigation. Your father did the hard work," I said. Ruiz studied the hillside behind us, then the open lake. "Your timing was good. Another 10 seconds and these would have been at the bottom of Tahoe." He glanced toward the trees. "For what it's worth, you probably saved the case." Behind us, DeAndre was being pulled to his feet. As they walked him toward the cabin, he looked back at me and smiled. Not angry, not defeated, just calm. And that smile made something in my stomach tighten. Because men facing 15 years in federal prison usually don't look that relaxed. Which meant one thing. DeAndre Holloway still believed he had a way out. And as I watched the agents load him into the SUV, I realized something else. The most dangerous criminals are never the ones in handcuffs. The most dangerous ones are the people whose names were on that missing client list. And we still didn't know where it was. 3 days after DeAndre's arrest, I was sitting in a small conference room inside the FBI field office in Sacramento when Special Agent Ruiz placed a thick folder in front of me and said something that made the entire situation suddenly feel much bigger. "We still haven't found the client list." For a moment, I didn't say anything, because I had already suspected that. But hearing it confirmed out loud was different. The room smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Outside the glass wall, agents moved quickly between desks, phones ringing constantly. Financial crimes investigations are never quiet, especially when millions of dollars are involved. Ruiz sat across from me, arms folded. "Your father's ledgers were extremely detailed," he said. "Every transfer, every shell company, every offshore account. But the section labeled client list is missing." I nodded slowly. "I noticed that in the cabin." "Which means 2 possibilities," he continued. "Either your father hid the list somewhere else, or someone removed it before we got there. The second option sat heavy in the air. Someone else knew about the cabin, which raised a very uncomfortable question. Who? Ruiz opened the folder. Inside were printed photographs of the documents recovered from the safe. Wire transfers, corporate registries, tax filings. The scale of it was staggering. DeAndre Holloway had created a network of at least 19 shell companies across 5 jurisdictions. Money moved through them like water through pipes. Clean money in, dirty money out. Classic laundering structure. But the real problem wasn't the money. It was the investors. Without the client list, Ruiz said, we know how the system worked, but we don't know who funded it. Which means we don't know who the real criminals are. And that meant something far worse. DeAndre might just be the middleman. People with serious money don't usually manage their own laundering operations. They hire someone like him. Which meant somewhere out there were investors who had every reason to make sure this investigation failed. Do you think he destroyed the list before we got there? I asked. Ruiz shook his head. Unlikely. We searched his house, his office, his firm's servers. Nothing. And the cabin safe showed no signs of forced access before you arrived. So whoever removed it, did it after your father hid the evidence? I leaned back in the chair, which meant the list disappeared sometime in the last 5 years. And there were only a few people who even knew the cabin existed. My father, the attorney, and me. But someone else had clearly figured it out. Ruiz studied my face carefully. Your sister visited DeAndre in custody yesterday. That surprised me. Courtney? Ruiz nodded. She stayed for nearly 2 hours. That was interesting, because Courtney had barely spoken to him during the arrest. In fact, she looked ready to disown him on the spot. Did she say anything useful? I asked. Ruiz slid another photo across the table. Security footage from the detention center. It showed Courtney leaning forward across the table, talking intensely while DeAndre sat calmly. He seemed almost relaxed, confident, which matched the strange smile he gave me during the arrest.
What did they talk about? I asked.
Ruiz tapped the photo. We don't know yet, but we do know something else. He leaned forward slightly. DeAndre waived his right to a public defender this morning, so he hired a private attorney. Exactly, Ruiz paused. One of the most expensive criminal defense lawyers in Northern California. That made my stomach tighten, because lawyers like that cost millions, not hundreds of thousands, millions. Where would he get that kind of money? I asked quietly. Ruiz looked straight at me. That's exactly what we're trying to figure out. The room fell silent again, because the answer implied something disturbing. Someone was paying for DeAndre's defense, someone with serious money, which meant one of two things. Either one of the missing investors was protecting him, or DeAndre still had leverage. I thought about the missing list, then about Courtney's prison visit, and something suddenly clicked. What if he didn't need the list anymore? What do you mean? Ruiz asked. If DeAndre memorized the names. The room went quiet again. Some financial criminals keep records in their heads, not just numbers, entire transaction structures. If DeAndre knew who funded the operation, he wouldn't need the document, and those investors would have every reason to keep him quiet, which meant paying for his defense, maybe even arranging a deal. Ruiz leaned back in his chair. We've been considering that possibility, but that still leaves one question. Which one? Why your father hid the list in the first place? I didn't answer right away, because the more I thought about it, the more something felt off. My father wasn't reckless. He wouldn't hide the most important evidence in the same place as the rest, not unless it was meant to be discovered, which meant the list might not have been removed. It might have been hidden differently. Maybe Dad expected someone to come looking. Ruiz raised an eyebrow. Who? I thought about DeAndre, about the way he looked when he saw the empty sleeves. Not surprised, not relieved, just annoyed. Like he already knew the list wouldn't be there. And that meant something else. Maybe he already knew where it was, which led to a much darker possibility. What if the list wasn't stolen? What if it was given away? Ruiz leaned forward. By who? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me not to. I answered. Hello? Natalie. My sister's voice. Courtney. She sounded different. Not angry, not dramatic, just scared. I need to talk to you. About what? About DeAndre. I waited. Then she said something that made the entire case shift in a direction I hadn't expected. He told me where the client list is. The room went completely silent. Ruiz slowly straightened in his chair, and Courtney whispered something that made my blood run cold. It's not in the cabin. It's inside Dad's grave. 3 weeks after my father's funeral, at 9:10 on a gray Thursday morning, I stood in front of a cemetery gate with a federal warrant in my hand, and the uncomfortable realization that we were about to dig up my father's grave. The warrant had taken exactly 36 hours to secure. That alone told me how serious the FBI considered the missing client list. Before we go any further, let me ask you something. If someone told you the key to exposing a multi-million-dollar criminal operation was buried with your own father, would you open that grave? I didn't answer that question immediately either. But eventually, the law answered it for me. Because evidence doesn't care about grief. It cares about truth. The cemetery sat on the outskirts of Sacramento, quiet and empty, except for a maintenance truck parked near the chapel. 4 FBI vehicles were already waiting near the gravel road. Special Agent Ruiz stood beside them, speaking with a county official. When I stepped out of my car, he walked over. "You sure you want to be here for this?" he asked. "No. But if my father went this far to expose DeAndre, I'm not walking away now." Ruiz nodded once. Fair enough. Behind him, 2 men from the county coroner's office were unloading equipment from a truck. Shovels, ground probes, a portable canopy. This wasn't going to be a dramatic movie scene. It was going to be slow, clinical, respectful, but still disturbing. Courtney arrived 10 minutes later. She looked nothing like the woman who walked into the will reading. Her designer wardrobe was gone. Simple jeans, oversized sweater, hair tied back. She looked like someone who hadn't slept for days. When she saw me, she hesitated, then walked over. "I didn't know, Natalie," her voice cracked slightly, "about any of this, about the money, about the crimes." I studied her face. For most of our lives, Courtney had been the center of everything, confident, entitled, certain the world existed to support her. Now she just looked small. "How did you find out about the grave?" I asked. She swallowed. "DeAndre told me." "In prison?" "During the visitation. He said Dad hid the list somewhere no one would ever think to search." I waited. Then he said something strange. Something about the only place people never question what's inside. A coffin. Ruiz joined us. That's when we ran a scan of the burial permit records. Apparently, your father insisted on being buried with a sealed metal container inside the casket. Courtney frowned. "Is that unusual?" Ruiz nodded. "Very." The coroner stepped over. "We're ready to begin." I turned toward the grave. The headstone looked exactly the way it had 2 weeks earlier. William Carter, 1958 to 2026. Beloved father. Simple, clean, peaceful. Everything about it looked final. Until the digging started. The first shovel hit the soil with a dull thud, then another, and another. For 20 minutes, no one spoke. Dirt piled beside the grave. The sound of metal tools scraping earth echoed across the quiet cemetery. Courtney stood behind me, arms wrapped around herself. Eventually, the workers reached the top of the burial vault, a concrete lid. They carefully cleared the surrounding soil, then lifted the heavy slab aside. Inside sat the casket, sealed, intact. The coroner looked at Ruiz. "Proceed?" Ruiz glanced at me. I nodded. The lid opened slowly. Inside the casket, my father looked exactly as I remembered him from the funeral. Peaceful, still, unchanged. But the agents weren't looking at him. They were looking at the object resting beside him. A small steel box, about the size of a briefcase, bolted to the interior frame. Ruiz crouched down. "Well, looks like your father was serious." The coroner carefully removed the box. One of the agents unscrewed the mounting brackets. Within minutes, the container sat on a portable table under the canopy. It had a digital keypad, 6 numbers. I felt something cold run down my spine, because I had seen those numbers before. On the index card inside the leather pouch, the same code. I stepped forward, entered the sequence. The lock clicked. Ruiz opened the box slowly. Inside were 3 things: a thick envelope, a USB drive, and a second binder. This one, labeled in my father's handwriting. Primary client list. For a moment, no one moved. Then Ruiz picked up the binder and flipped it open. Pages of names filled the first section. Dozens, then hundreds. Executives, developers, private investors, and some names that made my stomach tighten. People with political influence. Real estate magnates, corporate board members. This wasn't just a fraud case. This was a network. "My father documented everything," Ruiz said quietly. Courtney stared at the pages. "How many people are on that list?" Ruiz turned another page. More names, more transaction notes, more shell company references. At least 200. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that happened in the cabin. Because suddenly, the scope of the crime became clear. DeAndre wasn't the mastermind. He was the accountant, the gatekeeper, the man who moved the money. But the real power belonged to the people on that list. And now the FBI had their names. Courtney looked at me. "What happens now?" Ruiz answered before I could. "Now we start making arrests." But there was still one thing left in the box: the envelope. Ruiz handed it to me. "Your father addressed this to you." My hands felt strangely steady as I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Natalie,
If you're reading this, it means DeAndre's lies finally caught up with him. I knew 5 years ago that something about his business didn't make sense. When I asked questions, he became nervous. So I followed the money. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. I realized the truth. DeAndre wasn't just stealing. He was protecting people far more powerful than himself. That's why I hid the evidence. Not from him, from them. If the wrong people found this list too early, they would destroy everything, including you. But if you're holding this letter now, it means the truth finally surfaced. Finish what I started. Love, Dad. My vision blurred slightly as I folded the letter. For years I believed my father had ignored what was happening around him, but he hadn't. He had been building a case, and now the final piece was in the FBI's hands. Ruiz closed the binder. Well, Natalie, looks like your father just triggered the largest financial investigation in this state in the last decade. Courtney whispered something beside me. What? I asked. She pointed at the last page of the binder. There's a note. I leaned closer. My father's handwriting again. One sentence. If DeAndre is arrested, someone on this list will try to stop the investigation. And the name written beside it was someone neither of us expected. My mother. At exactly 2:40 that afternoon, standing beside my father's open grave, I read the last line of his handwriting again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Barbara Carter, my mother. The name sat alone at the bottom of the page, not listed among the investors, not next to a dollar amount, just written in the margin beside my father's final warning. If DeAndre is arrested, someone on this list will try to stop the investigation. Barbara Carter. For a moment, I couldn't process it. My mother wasn't a financier. She wasn't a business owner. She had never even balanced a household budget without complaining. So why was her name there? Ruiz leaned closer to read it himself. Your father's handwriting? He asked. Yes. He nodded slowly, which means he suspected her involvement. Courtney shook her head immediately. That's impossible. Mom doesn't even understand basic banking. She can barely use online bill pay. Ruiz flipped through the binder again. Maybe she doesn't need to. Everyone looked at him. Money laundering operations don't just need investors. They need legitimate addresses, registered offices, places where official paperwork can be delivered without attracting attention. And suddenly a memory clicked in my head. 5 years ago, the year Courtney married DeAndre, the same year Dad transferred the $2.5 million. That was also the year something strange started happening at our family home. Certified mail. Lots of it. Large envelopes, international courier packages. Mom used to complain constantly about the mail. I thought it was just wedding planning paperwork. But now, the pattern made sense. Corporate filings, bank correspondence, shell company documentation. All delivered to one quiet suburban address. Our mother's house. Ruiz turned another page. Courtney Holdings, LLC. Registered agent address. Barbara Carter. Courtney's face drained of color. No, she whispered. Ruiz continued reading. And there's more. He turned the binder toward us. Multiple corporations tied to the same address, 3 of them, all using Barbara Carter as the registered contact. Which meant something terrifying. My mother wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was legally tied to the structure of DeAndre's entire laundering operation. That's when Courtney sat down heavily on the edge of the canopy table. You're saying Mom helped him? Not necessarily knowingly, Ruiz said carefully. But on paper, she's involved. I stared at the binder, then at my father's grave. And suddenly I understood why he wrote that warning. If DeAndre was arrested, someone connected to the operation would try to stop the investigation. Not because they were loyal, because they were scared. And my mother had the most to lose. Courtney grabbed my arm. Natalie, Mom doesn't know any of this. She's going to panic. I nodded slowly. Exactly. And when people panic, they make mistakes. Ruiz closed the binder. We need to bring her in. For questioning? For protection.
Courtney blinked. Protection? Ruiz looked at both of us. If 200 people are tied to this laundering network, some of them will be very powerful and very desperate. People like that don't like investigations. They especially don't like witnesses, which meant my mother might not just be a suspect. She might also be a liability. Ruiz turned to one of the agents. Get a team to her house immediately. The agent nodded and walked away, already dialing his phone. Courtney rubbed her forehead. This can't be happening. It already is. But something still bothered me. Dad didn't just write Mom's name randomly. He left a specific warning, which meant he believed she would do something. What exactly? Ruiz noticed my expression. What's on your mind? I flipped to the final page again. Look at the date. He leaned closer. The note was written only 2 weeks before my father died, which meant by then, Dad already knew the investigation was coming, and he knew someone would try to interfere. Ruiz frowned. Interfere how? I thought about my mother, about how quickly she sided with Courtney and DeAndre, about how aggressively she pushed me to pay off the foreclosure, about how she tried to guilt me into supporting them. Then it clicked. If she believed the investigation could expose her involvement, she wouldn't just panic, she'd try to destroy evidence, which meant something else might still exist, something not in the cabin, something not in the grave, something inside her house. Ruiz understood immediately. Search warrant. Exactly. But before he could call it in, his phone rang. He answered quickly. Ruiz. He listened for a few seconds. Then his expression changed. How long ago? Another pause. Understood. He ended the call. Courtney stood up immediately. What happened? Ruiz looked at both of us. That was the team we sent to your mother's house. And? They arrived 20 minutes ago. My stomach tightened. And the house is empty. Courtney's voice dropped. Empty? No Barbara, no car, no phone, nothing. Which meant my mother already knew. How? Courtney whispered. Ruiz didn't answer immediately. Instead, he flipped back through the binder one more time, then pointed at a name halfway down the page. Someone on this list must have warned her. The name beside his finger made my pulse jump, because it wasn't a banker or a developer. It was someone much more powerful. A United States senator. And if a sitting senator was involved in the laundering network, this investigation had just become something far bigger than financial fraud. But the most dangerous part wasn't the politics. It was the final message Ruiz received before hanging up. Your mother didn't just disappear, Natalie. He looked at me carefully. She withdrew $300,000 in cash from a private account this morning, which meant my mother wasn't running out of fear. She was running with money. And if she was running, she was probably heading somewhere very specific. Somewhere connected to the people on that list. Somewhere the FBI couldn't easily reach. And unfortunately, I had a very strong idea where that place might be. 4 hours after my father's grave was opened, I was sitting in the back seat of an unmarked federal SUV, watching the sun set behind the Sacramento skyline, and trying to accept a reality that still felt impossible. My mother had vanished, and according to the banking records Ruiz had just pulled, she didn't leave empty-handed. $300,000 withdrawn in cash, 9:12 that morning. Less than 20 minutes before the FBI arrived at the cemetery. Someone had warned her. And the moment I realized who that someone probably was, my stomach tightened. Before we go further, let me ask you something. If your own mother disappeared the same day a federal investigation exposed a network of powerful criminals, would you assume she was running from them or running to them? Because the more I thought about it, the more the answer became obvious. Ruiz sat in the passenger seat of the SUV, scrolling through information on a tablet. We're tracking her last known movements now. Courtney sat beside me in the back seat, silent and pale. Her entire world had collapsed in less than 72 hours. First her husband arrested, then her father's hidden investigation. Now her mother disappearing with a suitcase full of cash. She looked like someone trying to wake up from a nightmare that refused to end. "Natalie," she whispered, "what if Mom really is involved?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was complicated. In money laundering operations, there are two types of accomplices: the ones who understand exactly what they're doing, and the ones who simply enjoy the benefits without asking questions. My mother had spent years enjoying expensive dinners, gifts, vacations paid for by DeAndre's successful investments. Whether she knew the full truth didn't change the legal reality. Her name appeared on corporate filings, her address appeared on shell companies, and now she had fled with cash. From the outside, that looked exactly like guilt. Ruiz finally spoke. "We've confirmed something else." He turned the tablet toward us. "Bank records, transfers, corporate registrations. See this address?" I leaned closer. "My childhood home." "Exactly," Ruiz said. 5 shell companies use that address as their registered office. Courtney shook her head. "But that's just paperwork. Mom barely checks the mail." "Maybe." Ruiz zoomed in on the screen. "But look at the signatory authorizations. 3 of those companies required identity verification, which means your mother had to appear in person at a bank to confirm them." Courtney's face drained of color. "You're saying she knew?" "Not necessarily everything, but enough to sign legal documents." The SUV turned onto a downtown street and stopped outside the FBI field office. Night had fully fallen now. Inside the building, lights glowed across several floors. Financial crimes investigations rarely sleep. Ruiz stepped out first. "Come on, we have something you need to see." We followed him upstairs into a large briefing room. A wall-sized screen displayed dozens of photos and documents, names, companies, transaction charts. The scale of the network was staggering. 200 investors across 3 countries. Over $100 million moved through DeAndre's firm in the last 6 years. But what caught my attention wasn't the numbers. It was the list of names Ruiz had highlighted in red. These are the priority targets. Developers, corporate executives, political donors, people with enormous influence. One name in particular stood out: Senator Richard Langford, the same senator whose name appeared beside my mother's in the binder. Courtney stared at it. "A senator?" Ruiz nodded. Langford's Political Action Committee invested heavily in several real estate funds tied to DeAndre. Which means if the laundering charges stick, he's finished politically. And powerful people don't accept that quietly. He clicked another slide. Security footage appeared on the screen. A bank lobby. Timestamp, 9:12 a.m. My mother stood at the counter, nervous, clutching her purse, speaking quickly with a teller. She looked smaller than I remembered, but determined. After a few seconds, the teller handed her a thick envelope. Cash withdrawal. $300,000. Courtney covered her mouth. Where did that account come from? Ruiz zoomed in on the account details. The account belongs to a company called Westbridge Consulting. Registered agent, he paused, Barbara Carter. The room went silent again. My father's note made more sense now. My mother wasn't just connected to the operation. She had access to hidden money, which meant she had been useful to someone, probably very useful. Ruiz turned back to the screen. The footage continued. My mother took the envelope, turned, and walked out of the bank. But the next part was what changed everything. A black sedan pulled up outside the entrance. A man stepped out. Tall, gray suit. He opened the rear door for her. Courtney leaned forward. Who is that? Ruiz zoomed the frame. The man's face became clear. My heart dropped, because I recognized him immediately. Not from personal life, from the binder. He was one of the names on the client list. Michael Brennan, a billionaire real estate developer, and one of the largest investors in DeAndre's laundering network. Courtney whispered,
Why would he pick her up? Ruiz answered calmly. Because your mother didn't just run. She was extracted. The word hung heavily in the room. Extracted. Which meant this wasn't a panicked escape. It was a coordinated move. Someone powerful had decided to remove her from the situation, to protect her, or silence her. Ruiz switched to another camera angle, the sedan driving away, license plate visible. We ran the plate. The car belongs to a private aviation company, which means Brennan probably flew her somewhere. Courtney's voice trembled. Where? Ruiz tapped another file on the screen. Flight records. Private jet departure. Sacramento Executive Airport. 10:02 a.m. Destination. He paused. Lake Tahoe. My pulse spiked. The cabin. Exactly. Courtney stared at him. But why would she go back there? Ruiz folded his arms. Because someone believes there's still something hidden at that property. Something we didn't find. I felt a sudden chill. The safe was empty when DeAndre opened it, except for the documents, the drives, the binder. But my father was too careful, too thorough. He wouldn't leave the most dangerous evidence in just one place, which meant there might still be something in that cabin. Something important enough for a billionaire investor to send my mother back there. Ruiz looked directly at me. We're sending a team back tonight. But there's one problem. What? If Brennan's involved, this isn't just financial crime anymore. It's obstruction, witness tampering, possibly worse. He stepped closer. Natalie, if your mother is at that cabin right now, she isn't there to hide. She's there to destroy something. And whatever it is, it's important enough that someone put a private jet in the air to get her there first. Which meant the race we thought ended with DeAndre's arrest had just started all over again. At 11:38 that night, I was back on the same mountain road leading to the Tahoe cabin. But this time, I wasn't alone. 6 federal vehicles moved quietly through the dark forest, headlights cutting through tall pine trees as we climbed the narrow dirt road. In the distance, the lake reflected the moon like a sheet of black glass. The last time I came here, I was racing against DeAndre. Now we were racing against my own mother, and possibly a billionaire who had far more resources than we did. Special Agent Ruiz sat beside me in the SUV, studying a map on a tablet. The cabin property covers about 2 acres, he said quietly. Main structure here, small boathouse near the shore, and a storage shed behind the tree line. We searched the main house earlier this week, but not the rest of the property, which meant if something had been hidden, it might still be there. Courtney sat silently behind us. She insisted on coming. Ruiz wasn't thrilled about that, but technically she still had legal ties to the estate, and emotionally, I think she needed to see the truth for herself. The convoy slowed, headlights dimmed. We were close. Ruiz raised his radio. All units hold lights. Quiet approach from here. Engines shut off one by one. The forest became silent again. Only wind moving through the trees. We stepped out carefully. The cold mountain air hit my face. Agents moved quickly but quietly across the gravel driveway. The cabin lights were on. That alone told us everything. Someone was inside. Ruiz whispered into his radio. Team 1 cover the front. Team 2 with me around the back. I followed him toward the side of the house. Courtney stayed near one of the vehicles with another agent. The porch boards creaked slightly as Ruiz climbed the steps. He pushed the door open slowly. FBI, his voice echoed through the cabin. No response. We moved inside. The living room looked almost exactly the way it had 3 days earlier. Fireplace, large windows, the metal safe still open beside the wall. But something had changed. Papers were scattered across the floor, furniture slightly moved. Someone had been searching. Ruiz motioned toward the hallway. Kitchen clear, bedroom clear, bathroom clear, no one inside, which meant she had already moved somewhere else on the property. Then we heard it. A faint metallic sound outside, near the lake. Ruiz immediately turned. Back door. We stepped outside into the cold night. Moonlight illuminated the path leading down toward the water. And there, near the boathouse, a figure moved. Courtney's voice came from behind us. "Mom?" The figure froze, slowly turned, and in the pale light I saw her face. Barbara Carter, my mother.
She looked older than she had just days earlier. Hair messy, eyes red from crying, but determined, very determined. In her hands, she held a shovel, and beside her, a patch of freshly disturbed ground. Ruiz stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, step away from the hole." She shook her head. "No." "Mom, what are you doing?" Courtney cried. My mother looked at both of us. "You shouldn't have come here, Natalie, you especially." I stepped closer. "Mom, whatever you're doing, stop." Her hands tightened around the shovel. "You don't understand." "Then help us understand." Tears rolled down her face. "Your father ruined everything." That sentence hit like a punch. Ruiz moved a step closer. "Mrs. Carter, step away from the hole." She ignored him. 5 years ago, when DeAndre started making real money, your father panicked. He thought something illegal was happening. He wanted to report everything." Courtney whispered. "So he investigated." "Yes." My mother laughed bitterly. "But he didn't realize how many people were involved. People with power. People who don't tolerate interference." She pointed at the ground. "He hid something here, something that could destroy them." Ruiz's voice became firmer. "Mrs. Carter, drop the shovel." But she kept talking. "Brennan called me this morning. He told me if that evidence reached the FBI, hundreds of lives would collapse. Businesses, careers, families." Courtney's voice cracked. "Mom, those people are criminals." My mother shook her head violently. "No, they're powerful, and powerful people don't lose." Then she looked directly at me. "Natalie, if that evidence disappears tonight, everything goes back to normal. The investigation falls apart, DeAndre walks, and all of this ends." The silence that followed was heavy, because we all understood what she was saying. She wasn't trying to escape. She was trying to destroy the final piece of evidence. Ruiz raised his voice. "Last warning, drop the shovel." Instead, my mother thrust the shovel into the dirt and pulled up a small metal case, about the size of a laptop. Ruiz moved forward instantly. "Don't!" But she had already opened it. Inside were several memory cards, more digital records, more evidence. Probably the final backup my father created. My mother lifted one of the cards, then looked at the dark water behind her. "If these go into the lake, no one will ever prove anything." Courtney screamed, "Mom, don't!" Agents rushed forward, but my mother stepped backward toward the edge of the dock. Another step, and she dropped the evidence. Another step, and everything my father built could disappear forever. Then she looked at me one last time and said the one sentence I never expected to hear from her. "I'm sorry, Natalie, but family comes first." And she raised her hand, ready to throw the memory card into the lake. For a single frozen moment, everything stood still. My mother stood at the edge of the dock, the dark lake stretching behind her, one hand raised with the memory card between her fingers. Agents surrounded the area. Courtney was crying. Ruiz had his hand half raised, ready to move. But everyone knew the truth. If she dropped that card into Lake Tahoe, the final evidence against dozens of powerful people could disappear forever. And my father's entire investigation might collapse. The wind moved across the water, cold and sharp. My mother's hand trembled slightly. "Natalie," she said quietly, "you don't understand the people involved." I stepped forward slowly, one step, then another. "Maybe I don't, but I understand Dad." She shook her head. "Your father was stubborn. He thought exposing them would fix things. But all he did was start a war we can't win." Courtney cried behind me. "Mom, please, just give them the card." My mother looked at her, and for a second I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Fear.
Not anger, not manipulation. Real fear. "They told me what would happen," she whispered. "If the investigation continues, people will lose billions. Some of them will go to prison. And when powerful men go to prison, they take revenge." Her eyes moved back to me. I was protecting this family. I shook my head. "No, you were protecting their money." Ruiz stepped closer. "Mrs. Carter, you don't have to do this." But she ignored him. Instead, she looked at the card again, then at the lake. One quick motion, and it would be gone. "Natalie," she said softly, "you always thought the world was simple, right and wrong, crime and justice. But the world doesn't work that way. Sometimes the truth destroys everything." I felt something tighten in my chest, because for a moment, a very small part of me wondered if she was right. My father had already died. Our family was shattered. Courtney's life was collapsing. And if the investigation continued, hundreds of powerful people would become enemies. Enemies with resources, influence, and long memories. But then I remembered something my father used to say when I was younger. Numbers don't lie. People do. And this entire nightmare existed because too many people had lied. I took one more step forward. Dad didn't hide this evidence to destroy our family. He hid it to protect people like us. People who don't have private jets or senators on speed dial. My mother's hand trembled harder now. "They'll come after you, Natalie." "Maybe. But if no one ever fights back, they win every time." The silence stretched across the dock. Then something unexpected happened. Courtney walked past me, straight toward our mother. "Courtney," Ruiz warned, but she didn't stop. "Mom," she said softly, "for the first time in my life, I actually want to do the right thing." My mother stared at her. Courtney continued walking slowly until she stood only a few feet away. "You always told me to marry someone successful, someone powerful, someone who could take care of me." Her voice cracked. "But look where that got us." My mother's grip loosened slightly. Courtney reached out her hand. "Please, just give it to me." For several long seconds, no one moved. The wind moved across the lake again. Finally, my mother lowered her arm. Not all the way, but enough. Courtney stepped closer, took the memory card gently from her fingers, and handed it to Ruiz. The agents exhaled almost at the same time. Ruiz carefully placed the card into an evidence bag. "Mrs. Carter, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice." My mother didn't resist. She looked tired. After a moment, Ruiz walked back over. He held up the evidence bag. "Your father just closed the biggest money laundering case we've seen in years." I looked out at the dark water. He should have been here to see it. Ruiz nodded. People like him rarely are. Over the next 6 months, everything unraveled exactly the way my father predicted. DeAndre Holloway accepted a federal plea deal. 15 years in prison. More importantly, he cooperated. The client list led to 72 federal indictments. Executives, developers, financial managers. Even Senator Richard Langford resigned 2 weeks before his own indictment. The financial network collapsed almost overnight. Over $100 million in illegal funds were seized. My mother accepted a lesser charge for cooperation. 2 years in federal prison. Courtney filed for divorce before DeAndre's trial even began. And the Tahoe cabin? I kept it. Not because of the money, because of what it represented. The place where my father chose to hide the truth until someone was ready to uncover it. Sometimes I sit on the dock at sunset and think about the moment my mother almost threw that card into the lake. 1 second. One decision. That's all it would have taken to bury the truth forever. But the truth didn't disappear that night. And if you've ever watched powerful people try to convince everyone that justice is impossible, remember something. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to let the evidence sink.